And ultimately, like I've been saying in the the past days, it's not how you do it, it's how it ends up looking like what really matters, and how creative you are in using these quote unquote simple tools, right? So we're going to start with an aerial shot here that I'll say it right now. This fancy Nuke comp in here was not done by me. Was done by Johnny Allen, who you've met and talked about materials, some fancy materials in 3D Max and using V-Ray. But he was kind enough to organize it for us in groups in here, so we can go through the basic concepts of what he did, or what we typically do either on After Effects or in Nuke, to integrate CG into helicopter footage. You'll see it also addresses one of the questions someone asked yesterday about whether we have our EXRs with all the passes in them or not. Right? You can see that we don't. We have all masks in here, and we actually don't have any passes other than the main pass. There's no need for it because it rendered pretty sweet already as it was. So that's the main pass, right?
More of like what happens when once we bring the data in and we know that we have to put a couple real people in a shot, and how we would go about integrating them in properly. So this is like a combination of the thing you just saw. I'm not going to do the exporting and all that stuff. I've already got all my nulls in here. And I'll just kind of turn on and off some of these layers to show you what's happening. So we basically have these couple people right here, and if I were to isolate them, you can see them right there. I can move my playhead. You can see that they're staying stuck. Turn that off. Takes a little bit longer on these ones, but they're in the right spot. They're from our library. We have a pretty extensive library of footage that we have gathered through the years, and it's actually getting a little bit old because some of the stuff was acquired with like older methods. We have the red camera now. We really need to talk about like updating our library with either newer things. Like sometimes you'll see in some of our library items like people still using like flip phones and all that. It's not exactly as there's even a guy that we still have that reads the newspaper all the time.
Well,
what are those?
we should keep him because they're going to be hipsters pretty soon.
That's true. What's old is new. Flip phones are cool. So
like cool people from the 80s,
right.
And the 90s.
So what's happening here is we basically will do anything we can to integrate them in as best as possible. If I were to take and turn and isolate this layer right here, you can see this is a reflection. And it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but once I turn the transparency off and I turn the layer on and off, you can see that it's just adding a little bit of realism to where their feet are there. If you were to hit the scale function here, you can see that all it is -100 right there. And you might move the layer up and down a little bit to, depending on the strength of the reflection, to make sure it doesn't look like it's way far away from them, or that they're, optically, realistically speaking, their feet would be on top of what that reflection is. We'll add some blurs to it to just make sure that it looks like it's integrating with the shot. In this instance right here, this is a shadow that is built to match the shadows that are seen throughout the space. You can see these seats here and other geometry is casting shadows on here. So if I were to turn these off and on, again, just another added bit of realism to tie it in. There's an example that I'll go into a little bit more in detail with this, is that one thing you want to try and eliminate when possible is double shadows. I mean, we'll go so far as to say you got to do it all the time. because it'll really kill the realism. So what I went and did in here, I have a guide layer turned on. It's not the guide layers you can use as reference in templating in After Effects, so that you can still have it pre-composed, but it doesn't contribute to the render. So I went in and I essentially just masked out some of these areas where where it would be doubling up. Is it perfect? No, but it does a good enough job of making it so they don't look like they're all piling up.
It's detail stuff, right? It's stuff that not a lot of people are going to notice, especially depending on the length of the shot and things like that. Could you use the shadow pass? You could also use the shadow pass if you had rendered it, right? But you can also make it way more complicated if you try getting fancy with all those things than it needs to be, right? Because this shot's going to last 2 seconds on screen, and you really just want to make sure that people read like their slight, they're stuck to the ground, they have their grounding shadows, and if there's direct light, you want to have their long shadows and all that. Another thing to be careful about to that point, and using library people so close to the camera like this, in a camera that is panning up or that is pushing in and going over people, is that these are flat, right? And they start to fall apart once the camera goes over their shoulder, and then the guys look the same. You're not seeing their shoulders, you're not seeing the tops of their heads, and then the camera keeps going up, 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 up. So be careful with that. Be careful with the crazy moves. I mean, I know someone asked, on day one about doing crazy cameras. Like, unless you really want to, don't do it.
I'll show you a quick example here. Well, this is the example rendered out, and this first frame looks great, huh? Just to quickly explain what this is. This has some real smart motion blur applied to it. In the first frame, when it's calculating what it needs to do, it's just going to go screwy because it doesn't know how to gauge the vector.
There's no reference. There's no reference. There's no previous frame, so it's just freaking out.
Okay. So this is a render of that other one right here. I'll let it play down.
Obviously, there's a lot of light already, so your subjects are going to be lit too much already. So with the camera settings, you expose it properly, and then you have to start adding more light on top of your subjects, right? And make sure that the light that you're adding to your subjects is strong enough to go over the lighting that you have to light the whole studio. So that's really the basic concept of what to do, because if you have stronger light, if you don't have strong enough light to even out the floor and the walls, then you're going to get all these hard shadows everywhere. You're going to have a very hard time keying things. And it's all going to depend on your shot. So as you can see, we move the lights sometimes because we don't care how the left of the screen is lit because we're not seeing it, right? And so we needed a light from the top. So we use one of the long lights to get that light from the top for the character. And you can use reflectors and all that stuff. So you'll find that when you start doing research of professionals that do this, there's no book that tells the rules of how to do this for any of what we do.
Ambient light from our room here just bouncing around and influencing the shot. And the spill killer, it's pretty much magic as far as I'm concerned, because it just gets rid of it pretty much by enabling it. But these are just default settings, and you click enable and it goes away, and that's all there is to it really. And then in the light wrap, all you have to need to do, remember, keep in mind is you have to select your background layer as the. It's like this is basically, you can keep it as a guide layer too, like Dave pointed out earlier. Like I keep it on and set as a guide layer, or you can just keep it off. It's just a matter of preference. Sometimes it's just I like to keep it off so I don't confuse myself.
There's a special thing I want to mention about the light wrap here. This particular plugin. If you're ever using this, you got to make sure that your footage is the exact same size as the back plate.
Like, absolutely.
Yeah, because if you don't, then it will it won't sample the right area. It's just the way that it works. It doesn't. It needs to know that the thing is in the exact spot. So if you had I don't know if I need to explain any further than that, but basically just make sure that your backplate that you're sampling from and the footage that you have, even if you have to pre-comp things, just to make sure that they line up, that you're going off of the same in 1920 1080.
Because in the under the hood, what happens is, imagine that you have your 1080 subject, right? And then your backplate is for some reason 4K. It would put it behind it, and it would only use the lower left side of it, or the it's like in Nuke. If you don't set your composition before you start doing all your things in Nuke, if you don't set your size properly, then when you start bringing things in, it's going to do the exact same thing. It's just going to have this huge thing in there, but your window is smaller.
We know we had to call out this intersection right here. This is a very important intersection in Brooklyn, and the site is like right on the corner of it. So this is where it's at, and we needed to show that. So there's places where, again, we have like Barclays Center called out in its proximity to the City Point project. These graphics we're able to, like, again, in a stylistic way, talk about how their site sat on some of these other, again, very notable places. You can see we did a little bit of quick roto work to get this girl to kind of go in front of it there. Fun little things like that. Basically for these things, just taking layers and in After Effects, masking them off, rotating them in the 3D space once we track the camera, just doing fun things like that. So as far as like high-level facts that we might want to talk about, you might want to talk about square footage or the phases of construction. So this shot right here was a cool little joint thing between Max and which I'm not all that great with, as maybe evidenced earlier, and then putting some stuff into After Effects. So I went in and I made an ISO camera of this massing model of this axon, and was able to just take a couple stills and animate them around and make a cool dynamic way of calling out the phases of the project and the square footage in a way that was a little bit different than just flashing text up on the screen. Because I think that something like this is a lot more appealing to take in as a message than just having to read through a book or just white text on dark backgrounds and such. So, and add a little bit of life to it too. And also to have cool things happen, like right there with the moving through making it look like it really is projected on there. And then we have things like, you may just want to communicate the vibe. So we have these little overlays. We have a term for this at Neoscape. We call them loco passes. Because it's just this crazy stuff that's just going on top. So you might take a logo or a piece of artwork and just kind of just mess it up and just do fun things with it, blink it on and off, and put weird transfer modes like we all experiment with in Photoshop, because I know that most of us never really know exactly what transfer modes do, but you just cycle through the ones until you find the one that looks best.
Always a crapshoot.
So those sort of things. And then animated logos. We talked a little bit about the logos and finding certain assets, but at the beginning you can see this sequence. So that just takes if you were to step through it frame by frame, you could see the ends being drawn on there with our little white line, with the Y there, and a cool sort of, kinetic typography sort of thing. I'm drawing the T on there, have it rotate out, and there's your branding.
When you have just a couple frames that just don't quite look right, throw a loco pass on it.
It's true. Yeah, it's true. We recently for the South Street Seaport project, when we had to blend. I don't know if we blended two cameras in together or if we had to really jump ahead in time, but there was this part where there's two different cameras, and we just slapped a little bit of crazy sort of sleight of hand on top of it, and no one would ever notice it. And then just to show the end here too, the way that this wraps up at the end. So again, just a cool little, and these are just two examples of logo animation things that we've done. I mean, we've run the gamut of like 3D extrusion stuff, or taking and deconstructing a logo, and I mean, you name it, we have to think it up. All right, so I was going to talk about scene organization briefly. What I'm going to also do is I got to load up some stuff in After Effects here. There's as you might imagine, with the whole 3D side of things, I'm not going to go over all the steps of bringing in nulls and all that again. It's the same thing. I mean, we get camera data tracked in from the guys that will be using something more like PF Track or Nuke to do their tracking. They'll set their models up, they'll send their nulls to us, and then we can start putting messaging in things like hilly shots. So again, I think we kind of covered that earlier more. So what I'll do now is talk about our proof of concept stage that we did with this.
So we send the client a couple of clips of the voices of the different people that we think fits the description that was already agreed upon, and they choose, right? We choose together with the client, and so we book the time in a studio, and then we basically get on either go to the studio and record with them, or do it over the phone, which is very common, where they can actually just patch you through while the whole recording is taking place, and then you can directly talk to the talent that's in the booth and say, well, that sounded a little, too. Put more emotion here, put more emotion there, put more emphasis on this last, sentence. Read it again. Really, it's too fast. Or right there, do some edits. Get rid of that word so you can have options and different takes, right? So what you see there in the top represents that. These are all the different takes that Vasily took from all the clips and decided those were the good ones, right? And we had to get rid of a lot because otherwise the guy would be speaking throughout the whole thing. So you can see there's very few spaces here, 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 and here, right? And so the audio there, because it comes from a professional studio, it should be already very good, right? You can see the waveforms are good. They're not clipping. They're not going all over the top. They're also not very low. So you have what you need is pretty much what you get of an EXR or a well-exposed photograph. Same thing, right? You don't want to clip it. And then we get these tracks from online services, right? From Killer Tracks. What's the name of the other ones? There's many online services that you can buy stock music, right? From. So
Killer Tracks is the one that we go to most, though.
This clip in particular, it's an okay clip. So people, at home make music, they upload it, and that's the end of it. But many clips do come with a bad mix, or they're clipping. The audio is clipped, and then it's unfortunate because you're kind of reviewing these things online and you're listening to like an MP3 sample of it, and you can't really tell these things until you actually bring it into a program like this and start seeing the levels of the clip. But in this particular case, they're good clips, and let's say just this little part in here. This guy actually came in like this, there. So that S, at the end was a little over the top. So it's very straightforward. You can literally grab this thing and normalize it by hand. It's slightly better, right? It still was a little clipped, but it's just the S, so it's not a big deal. So you would do things like that. Phrase by phrase is going to be different. Sometimes you're going to get audio that has noise in here where it's supposed to be silence, right? And in Audition, it's very, very easy to get rid of all that noise throughout the whole clip. You can sample that noise just as you would sample noise on an image and tell the program to get rid of all that noise throughout the whole clip. You have to be careful with it, though, because it can get rid of some real audio, just as you have to be careful with denoising your images, because it can get rid of some detail. So it's the same logic applies to this thing. Just quickly, if you go to your effects, and then you go to, right? So in this particular film, I went with a lot of purples and oranges, and actually that reminds me of a tool you might want to use for this in choosing your colors or your color palette for your color grading. There's a website. Give me 1 second. I have it here. Well, there's a tool for Photoshop, right? That it's a plugin called Coolers or something like that. That it's pretty cool.
K-U-L-E.
This guy, Cool.
Oh, that's not it.
Coolers.
I don't know what that is.
That is a plugin. That is a plugin. It's a pretty cheap plugin that you can buy online. Google it.
People trying to figure out how many confusing ways they can spell color.
Yeah, and basically you can do what I want to show you here on this website is. I thought I had it in here, but it doesn't matter. If you just Google color palette generator. Let's see.
Color.
So, but this is the guy that I use. This is the one that I like the most. So this is very cool because you can, you can get the complementary colors, the triad,
Christmas.
right? So
I know personally, I never feel very comfortable with my color selections at all. So when I certainly like to get some little bit of help every now and then from tools like this.
So it's very nice, to have this reference, and then you can save this. We use it also for when we do renderings, and you want to, set the tone or the mood. Choose the colors wisely, and use these. There's hundreds of these tools and websites and stuff like that. So that plugin, you install it in Photoshop, and then you have the exact same thing you see in here. Well, it generates you select your primary color, and it's just going to choose the complementary colors for you, and it's just you can go from there instead of having the blue sky and then the purple reflection of the sky and being all over the place. So going back to this guy, so without going too much into the technicalities of this, it's very straightforward in that I want to explain a little bit of. You're going to find, depending on the software, that the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights can be named offset, gamma, and gain also. So, and that is because when there were video, they're doing video color grading, they were using tools that were not really to do color grading, but they were misusing them basically and started to stylize video. Those settings came from there, or those names, offset, gamma, and gain, and they just stuck. And the circles with the colors in all the color grading programs also come from those devices, those physical devices that had their little joysticks and dials to, make sure that they had the right values, that video had the right value. What's the name of the I'll remember it in a sec. Yeah, there was a name to the so it's video amplifiers that they were using to do these things. Is the telecine. The telecine that they were doing. So it was video amplifiers, and they were basically misusing them, and that's where all these things came from, right? So again, that's like the rules and broken rules, got applied right there. So these stuff, if you choose, let's say we chose our oranges and the blues, as is the most common one. You just basically want to make sure, you want to make your shadows blue. You want to make your highlights, towards the yellow. There aren't that many highlights in here. It's more. So I'm exaggerating, obviously, here to, see the example in there. But this is something that is really going to take time for anyone, but it's not that complicated. It's literally just dialing those guys in and out in there. You can also shift the hue of what you're doing there, right? So in my experience, it's been a whole lot of trial and error to get the look I want for a particular animation. And not that every animation we do has a particular look. You just want to make it look good. You want to add, you know, that extra level of color or desaturation or saturation, like this. The City Point film was very Instagrammy looking, lots of orange and, you know, almost like duotone in, you know, in a sense. So you play those. We play those things by ear, and we like to play with those things, right? So the final one was this guy in here. For whatever reason, we decided to do that at this time. We have the shadows towards the blue, the highlights towards the yellow in there, and a contrast. And it makes a dramatic difference, just those two little things in there. One thing then that is important is what's the next shot, right? And is the next shot going to have, what does it look like? Compared to this guy. So you're gonna want to go shot by shot and compare your first shot, the shot you had, the previous shot to the next shot, and even the next shot, right? So come to this guy, and typically the way I do it is you color correct the one shot, color grade the one shot, then copy and paste all those settings to the next one. If the shot was shot with the same camera, with the same settings, on the same, you know, setup, it's going to kind of get you almost all the way there. This particular case, it wasn't that. That wasn't the case, but it is, for all intents and purposes, the same thing. I'm still going for the blues in the blacks, and I'm still going for the yellow in the highlights. Then there's all these other settings here down here that I wanted to saturate it a little bit more in there. Change the saturation of the shadow too, or the saturation of the midtones. These by default are 100 in here. So you change those guys, change those values, you're gonna get obviously, you know, different results. So then we added some curves to it too. Let me just get rid of that split. Same thing, an S curve. You don't want to clip the blacks on this thing, but you can go a little darker here if you wanted to. It looks way darker on the projector in there, but I can actually see here on the monitor where the clock hits the table. So as long as you don't have pure black in there, you should be good. So this is a collection of almost 2 years of work, and we're, you know, work that we're very proud of, and literally all we share with you in these 3 days, it's what we do and how we achieve this right here. So here we go.